Hi, my name is Adam Ryan, and I make things. Plays, films, the occasional musical on a bocce pitch. And what I want to talk about today is why none of that makes me more creative than you are. Today, I don't want to lecture you about the arts. What I want to do instead is convince you that arts and creativity are not rare abilities. They are things that we are using, each and every one of us, on a day-to-day basis to shape the world around us, most of the time without even noticing. I'd like to start, and you might notice that I have this big red box here, by taking you through a personal story of mine. I'd like to start by taking you back to the summer of 2009. I'm 7 years old. My father has picked me up from wherever I was before, and we're driving on the road to Nashar from Telatallawommu. It's a boiling summer's day. We don't have AC, and we're stuck in standstill traffic, which, as I look around, I'm sure is something you've experienced before. But that's not what I particularly remember. What I remember is this timeless moment between myself and my father. As we're driving, he puts on this song, Loving Each Day by Ronan Keating. And I wouldn't say I remember the song in that particular moment, but what I do remember is me in the back seat, crawling over, trying to cover my dad's mouth because he was such a bad singer, dying of laughter. And I'll always associate that song with that moment. And it's funny nowadays because I'll mention the song to one of my friends or someone my age, and they'll just look at me like this. No one knows what I'm talking about. I'm going to park that there for a second. See what I did there? We'll get back to it later. The way I've come to see it, when we talk about art, theater, the individual, the society around him, what we're really talking about is creativity and, maybe more importantly, culture. Now, I promised myself that this talk wouldn't be full of formal definitions, so I hope you'll excuse me for this next part. What is a culture? Is it the pastizzi? Is it the festi? Sure, but let's take it back a second. The word culture comes from the Latin word collere, which means to cultivate. Initially, this meant cultivating land, so agriculture, but it evolved to mean cultivating people, ideas, ways of living. So when we talk about culture, we don't just mean the pastizzi, the theater, the art, the traditions. We mean everything that we grow together. The question is, how does that actually happen? There's a little detail I left out in my earlier story. What I didn't mention is that a few months prior to that very car ride, my father had moved to the UK. Now we've changed the story. So that memory I just told you, the laughter, me hanging on the front seat trying to cover his mouth, it's not just a singular moment between myself and my father. No, it's one I'd spend the next 15 years wishing I could have more of. I started going to therapy at the age of 11 to cope with the fact that I basically lost one of my best friends, apart from maybe the 2 weeks a year that we actually see each other. And I haven't looked back since. And I'm drawn as a creative to stories about these things. Comedy, mental health, especially in men, and the things we don't usually say out loud. Comedy, mental health, talking about the things we don't want to say. I can't tell you the amount of times in those early therapy sessions I'd have a little chuckle before I said anything real to my therapist. You know, that little spoonful of sugar before the medicine goes down, using humor as a gateway to talk about my problems. I get slightly emotional now when I'm in my therapist's waiting room and I see this 40-year-old man waiting with me. What I see in him is I see someone who probably grew up thinking that men don't talk about this stuff. And he's there anyway. I'm like, yes, man, I see you. Here's what I want you to notice. You weren't in that car with me. You're not in that therapy waiting room. But what you can understand is the feeling that goes along with it, the longing for a person, the warmth, the nostalgia for a moment while it's still going on because you just don't want it to end, the relief of feeling so comfortable with someone. You're connecting to a feeling. And that's the thing. Even though I shared this from my personal experience, I've shared it to a point where you can understand and you might relate in your own way. And this is how it all happens in 3 simple steps: personal, shared, and societal. Let's take my situation as an example. We start from the personal. I'm in the back seat. My dad is playing Ronan Keating. I'm hanging over his seat, covering his mouth, dying of laughter. The song in particular doesn't matter. Then what if I share it, which is what art and theater does? What if I create a short film or a play or a song? You know, a son messing around with his dad, a moment of lightness in an otherwise tense story, a small human interaction. You don't know my exact memory, but you might understand and recognize, hey, that's like me and my dad. Or you might say, I miss that. My specific moment becomes a gateway for you to relate. Or maybe you see that scene and it's the opposite. You might go, I never had that with my dad. And that's also something, because now you're feeling something specific too. Either way, my moment becomes a door for you. Then, lastly, the societal. Imagine hundreds of people seeing and relating to that scene. It starts reinforcing ideas. Family as warmth, humor as connection, the fact that these small moments matter. And it might start shaping how people look at relationships. And slowly it might come to be what you expect from a father and a son. Isn't that so interesting? The fact that something so personal can be so universal. Now, fair enough, you might say, Adam, you're just talking about things from your own life. Who are you to assume that your stories translate? And fair enough. But luckily, as a person involved in the world of theater, I'd like to divert your attention to 2 shows I was part of last year. We start with show number 1, Bocce il Musical, a musical stitched from pieces of Maltese culture, a national game that's dying out in Bocce, a story that centers around the sale of a property, classic, and an immigrant working behind the bar. And instead of putting it inside TEDxUniversityofMalta or Spazio Creativ, we performed it around 6 bocce pitches across the island. It was exactly what it needed to be: local, colorful, accessible. It brought theater to people who had never gone to the theater before. A good night out and a mirror held up to who we are today. And then, onto my other show, there was Kif Tallim Tinsu, a Maltese translation of Paula Vogel's How I Learned to Drive, a play that was written in the 80s, set in 1960s America, a piece about the grooming and sexual abuse of a minor, thematically totally different to Bocce. And you might ask, why? Why translate a play written in the 80s, set in the 60s in America to Malta in 2025? Why do we keep staging Romeo and Juliet? Why do we keep staging Macbeth? Why do we keep telling the same stories over and over again? Well, those stories are universal. Our world keeps changing, and of course, it will continue. But our emotions don't. Love, loss, power, shame. We stage the same stories because we haven't finished learning from them. The story's not finished. Now, I've spent a lot of time talking about theater, and for a lot of you, theater might seem like the most, or rather, the least relatable thing in the world. There's this weird connotation with theater and art about who's let into these spaces or who gets to belong. There's this idea, and I was speaking to my friend about it, who's somewhere in the audience today, that the theater is for a certain high-class individual, that it's elitist, inaccessible. But I think most people are missing something. What do we mean by a theater? There's an audience, there is a person or people performing, and there's a story being told. By that definition, a law court is a theater. A football pitch is a theater. A lecture room is a theater. This TED Talk is a theater. Even when we talk about art in general, I look at you and I might ask you to name an art form, and you might tell me paintings, you might tell me film, you might tell me theater. But what about culinary arts? What about our festi? What about bitzilla, lace making? These are art forms baked so deeply in our culture that we've stopped even noticing them. Now, here's the thing about all the art around us. It isn't just sitting there as a reflection. It's also a reaction. I'm a storyteller, so let's take another trip, shall we? Let's go to post-war Japan, a country dealing with collective trauma, heavy censorship. People couldn't talk about what they had just lived through. Out of that comes manga. Cheap, easy to produce, easy to distribute. Stories about war and loss and what it means to be human, but disguised as fantasy, as robots, as pirates, because that was the way that the truth was allowed to come out. Or, let's take another trip. What if we go to Broadway in America? Why do all of these musicals, or most of these musicals, have the same shape? Someone arrives with nothing, someone reinvents themselves, an outsider becomes someone extraordinary. The same story told over and over and over again, whether that's Hamilton, Wicked, Rent, Legally Blonde. It's the American dream, in song form. It's the country telling itself a story about itself. Now, what if we head back to Europe? British film. This is England, Billy Elliot, Trainspotting. Darker, grittier, and almost always about social class. Who you are, who you know, where you've been, who your parents are, what dialect you speak. These are themes that British society has been wrestling with for centuries. What I'm trying to say here is that the art a society makes tells you what that society is going through, what it's dealing with, what it's proud of, what it's ashamed of, what it can't quite bring itself to say yet. There's a reason that authoritarian regimes like the Nazis or North Korea were so against art. They knew how much power it had. Art is both a mirror and a tool. Sure, it shows us who we are, but it also nudges who we become next. And that's true at every scale, whether it's a country processing a war or a community keeping a dying game alive on a bocce pitch. Because it's not just the story of this society, it's the story of its people. So my answer to the question, what stories can art and theater tell about ourselves and society? Honestly, all of them. It takes one person to reflect or influence another person, a group, a generation, a society, a culture. And I hate hearing this phrase, and I hear it from a lot of people. Oh, I'm not very creative. I'm not very artistic. Art and creativity are not rare abilities, and they're not difficult to access. It isn't reserved for some elite type of person. Creating something means bringing something to life that wasn't there before. But it also means that you might see something differently to the person sitting right next to you. It could be a theater show, sure. But it could also be a conversation, a handwritten note to a loved one, a new route home to avoid traffic, which I know, you've seen it all before. We all have experiences, opinions, things we love, things we hate, things we can't stand, things we wish we could say but don't have the voice right now. Some of us, well, every single one of us is already cultivating something. The only question is whether we share it. So with that in mind, I want to leave you right back where it started, in that car, stuck in traffic with my dad. Him singing badly, Me laughing, a song that nobody my age really knows. That memory is mine, yes. It's small and it's nothing. But the feeling of it, that's yours. And mine. And ours. That's all art has ever been. Thank you.